Good morning, and welcome to today's webcast, Navigating Grant Awards, Essential Next Steps for Success. Before we begin, I'm going to play a brief housekeeping video.
Welcome, and thanks for joining. We're pleased to present our continuing professional education webcast series. Before we begin, please keep the following in mind. You can customize how you view our presentation and interact with the presenter. For better viewing, close all other applications and turn up your speaker volume. You can adjust window size and placement or enter full screen mode using the controls at the top right of the window or dragging the bottom right-hand corner to resize. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of icons that relate to a different aspect of our session. You can download a PDF of today's slides from the Slide Deck and Handouts widget. You can ask questions by typing in the Q&A window and clicking Submit. We'll do our best to answer all questions or follow up via email. If you experience technical difficulty, refresh your browser by hitting the F5 key. Today's session offers 1 CPE credit. To receive credit, you must meet the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy requirements. You must attend at least 50 minutes of the session and respond to at least 75% of polling questions. To participate in the polls, please check the button next to your answer within the slide window and click Submit. We'll track your progress and alert you when you've earned CPE credit. You can then click the certificate icon in the CPE Progress widget and download your CPE certificate. Don't worry if you can't download your CPE certificate today. We'll email you a copy in 2 weeks. If attending this webcast in a group, you must complete our group CPE attendance sheet, available in our slide deck and handouts widget to receive credit. Please have all group members sign it and send only 1 sheet per group. CPE credit can only be awarded to participants registered as themselves and isn't available for participants who view the on-demand version. This presentation is not legal, investment, or accounting advice. We encourage you to seek the counsel of a professional service provider to apply this content to your specific circumstances.
I'm pleased to introduce today's presenters from Moss Adams, Michael Miranda-Moore, Manager, and Megan Otto, Senior Manager. And with that, I will pass it over to Megan to get us started.
Hey everyone, nice to meet you. My name is Megan Otto. I'm a Senior Manager here at Moss Adams, and I lead our grant management practice. Before joining Moss about 3 years ago, I worked in the nonprofit field, mainly doing direct service on federal grant programs, and I hope to share some of my experiences with you all today.
Hi everyone, I'm Michael Miranda-Moore. I am a grant compliance manager with Moss Adams. Prior to joining our grant compliance team a couple of years ago, I was in external audit for Moss Adams and focused primarily on not-for-profit and government audits with a specialty in single audits. So looking forward to sharing some of our expertise and insights with you all today.
As we get started, just want to share a few of the learning objectives for today. These are the items that we want you to walk away feeling confident about. Those include learning grant and compliance terminology, understanding common grant requirements, learning how to prioritize grant compliance within your organization, and to prepare for grant closeout. Our agenda for this webcast is first an introduction. Just already went through that, and then we're going to go into terms and definitions. We want to make sure you're familiar with the terms that we're using before we get into the nitty-gritty of grant management, grant compliance. Then we plan to give you an overview of what grant compliance is, and then hop into policies and procedures. Policies and procedures are a really key element to maintaining a grant and really is the starting point of maintaining compliance as well. Then we'll hop into grant monitoring and closeout. And then we'll talk about everybody's favorite topic, single audits. And then we'll go into questions.
Awesome. So I'll kick us off with some of the common terms and definitions that are helpful to understand the world of grant compliance. So to start, we'll go over a subaward. So a subaward, sometimes a subcontract, are funding arrangements where a pass-through entity will provide financial support to a subrecipient to fulfill part of a grant award that is received by the pass-through entity. It may include performance measures tied to the grant's objectives, programmatic decision-making, compliance with program requirements. And the main goal of the subaward is to distribute funds to community-based organizations or not-for-profit organizations to support the mission and objectives of the original funding agreement that the pass-through entity may not be resourced to be able to perform themselves. Subrecipient, those are the entities that receive a subaward from a pass-through entity to carry out the function or piece of the grant agreement. They may be a recipient of other awards as well, directly. A subrecipient can be a direct recipient from a federal or state local entity, and not just from a pass-through entity as well. Pass-through entity will be the organization that is given the initial funding to then re-grant out to subrecipients. This could be a state or local government. It could be a foundation that then re-grants out to community-based organizations. Pass-through entity can take a lot of shapes. A prime agreement. So your prime agreement is the contract between the awarded organization and the governmental entity. So the original contract that the pass-through entity, if there is one, would receive. And then next we'll go over a couple of, or a few of the different types of grant funding arrangements. So you can have a cost reimbursement award. So actual expenses would be reported by subrecipients that are incurred already. And then the monitoring entity, whether that's the pass-through entity or governmental entity, would review those expenses prior to approving payments out. So expenses happen first, payment comes after. Deliverable based. These contracts are based on the achievements of certain milestones or objectives in an award. So if there is an action that must take place first, and then an associated amount of funding that goes with that, once that action or deliverable has been met, then funding will be received by the organization. Forward funded. So a forward funded contract would mean that subrecipients receive a portion of the funds at contract execution, and then may be paid out later, either based on deliverables, or it could be based on reimbursement or other performance measures that must be met first. And then we have advance payment awards. So similar to a forward funded, a initial payment will happen at the onset of the contract execution. But that initial payment will then be recouped subsequently as additional reimbursement requests come through. Those are typically seen in tandem with a cost reimbursement award, where a organization may need a good chunk of funds to kickstart the program in order to start actually incurring expenses. And then once they do incur those expenses, then they will submit for reimbursement after that advance payment's been recouped. So next we want to talk about the common funding sources for grants. Their requirements will differ from funding source to funding source. So it's important to have a clear idea of where the funding is coming from especially if you're receiving it through a pass-through entity, because that may not be explicit in the contract or immediately knowable. So first is federal. This is where the majority of funding initially starts. So this would come from federal government agencies. This can be awarded directly to entities or to pass-through entities to then filter through. Some federal awards can go from federal to state and local level, then to a pass-through entity, and then to subrecipient community-based organizations. Then you have state. So state funding could be federally sourced, or it could come from appropriations or taxes, could even come from state bonds, city or county, very similar as well. But those could also come from the state level too, or from the federal government directly to the city or county. Sometimes that's seen with larger cities or larger counties that may serve pretty big populations and have pretty robust systems in place to be able to support the grant. And then you have private grants. Private grants can come in a lot of shapes and sizes. Often they are from foundations or donors, and private grants can have a variety of requirements, or they can have none. Many grants will have conditions to them that are definitely much less stringent than those that would come with a state, federal, or city local government award, but still have conditions that need to be met in order to either receive funding or recognize that funding as being earned.
I would add for smaller organizations, private grant funding can be really beneficial for you all to take some time, get your policies and procedures in place, get your practices all lined up, and then eventually start to apply for state and federal funding.
Awesome. Looks like we have our first polling question of the day. What type funding does your organization receive? A, federal, B, state, local, C, private, D, a mix of the above, E, none yet. I will give everyone a few moments to respond here, and just a reminder, to participate, please click the button next to the answer you choose and hit submit. And another reminder, if you would like to receive CPE credit for today's webcast, you will need to respond to at least 3 of the 4 polling questions. Awesome. And let's take a look at the results here.
Okay, so it seems like we have a pretty big mix across the board. Looks like primarily federal funding and a mix of the above. And then we have some folks, about 10%, who haven't received grant funding. So really great to hear that we have a really diverse audience. Especially enjoy talking to individuals that don't have experience with grants and seeing how we can support you best in those processes.
All right, what is grant compliance? So compliance is the foundation to everything. If you can demonstrate compliance with your funding requirements, then you'll be able to continue to receive funding and support your communities. But in addition to just demonstrating your compliance, effective grant compliance means that you're running a more effective program. Compliance is designed not just to force you to adhere to certain rules and regulations, but to help you be a bit more efficient grant recipient or subrecipient or funder. So the key components of grant compliance are the community support, funding source, the requirements, and then the execution of the program. Requirements may include the spending and use of funds, maybe some programmatic elements such as objectives or milestones that need to be met, maybe a number of people served, or a certain level of impact that's measured, frequency of recipient and subrecipient monitoring or audits. A lot of different elements can go into those requirements, and they'll vary pretty greatly from grant to grant, especially with different funding sources. Some will have much more, like we talked about, the private ones may have much less. It will change a lot, but having a good grant compliance function established will mean that you're prepared for any type of requirements that come through, and ensure that you're in proper compliance regardless of the type of award or the funding source. All right. How to prioritize grant compliance. Using a strategy like this will ensure that your organization's prioritizing grant compliance and set up to be compliant. So to start, ensure that you're creating comprehensive documented policies and procedures. We'll dive into policies and procedures more later. But one of the biggest gaps that we see is that a lot of organizations know how to do their jobs. They're doing them effectively. They've been doing them for a while, but there isn't very good, clear, structured documentation that's been formalized throughout the organization. And people leave and take that knowledge with them. So if you don't have documented policies and procedures, you may be missing that throughout transitions in your staffing that can result in gaps in your grant compliance function. Executing and monitoring. So make sure that you are properly executing the grant in accordance with the requirements and meeting your objectives. And also make sure that you're monitoring your progress, either the progress of your own implementation of the program, or if you're subgranting it out, the progress of the subrecipients that are carrying out part of the grant for you. Plan for subrecipient awards. So if you are going to be subgranting out the funding, make sure that you have a clear plan for how you will be awarding subrecipients, how you will be monitoring them, and how you're going to support them throughout that process. You don't just give them money and then walk away until reporting comes through. You have to make sure that you are available to support them through that, to make sure that they're meeting the objectives that you said that you would do. And then plan for program closeout. Often we get to the end of the program and it's a big sigh of relief and pats on the back that we did it. But we have to make sure that we're documenting everything appropriately, that we're wrapping things up. Final reports are going to funders. Everything that needs to be retained is retained, and that it's all clean and neat for closeout. And I think we're on to our next polling question.
Awesome. And our second polling question is, how often does your organization review and make updates to policies and procedures? A, annually. B, we make updates as we are required to. C, we have not made updates in a while. D, I'm not sure. I will give everyone a few moments to respond here. And just another reminder to click the button next to the answer you choose and hit submit. Your question will be polled. And another reminder, if you would like to receive CPE credit for today's webcast, you'll need to respond to at least 3 of the 4 polling questions. Awesome. Looks like we're slowing down here, and we can take a look at the results.
Okay,
I love
pretty
to see
split.
annually. For those that you are doing it annually, big pat on the back. That's fantastic.
Yes, that is music to our ears. Very common for organizations to either update them often or really like every 10 to 15 years is something that we see pretty frequently. So we would love to help everyone get into the best practice of updating their policies and procedures annually, not just when you're required to or when there is a new funding opportunity. It's really important to have everything documented. As Michael mentioned, there is staff turnover and they take that knowledge with them a lot of the time. We all know how to do our jobs, and sometimes we don't feel like it's necessary to document certain steps, but it is great to have them documented. It ensures consistency, it ensures compliance. Really, it's just an essential item for you to have in your toolbox.
Absolutely. And the more regularly that you're reviewing your policies and procedures, the less cumbersome those updates will be when you do need to make them.
All right. So we're going to hop into developing policies and procedures. What we've done with this section is we've broken it out by types of policies and procedures that your organization should have as a best practice. First, focusing on financial management and accounting policies and procedures, broken them up into subsections, different areas that you can review to ensure that you are fully covered. Some of the big ones that you will want to ensure that you have are around month and year-end close. What are your processes for how you're going to properly reflect all of your financial transactions at the month and year-end? We find that, especially at year-end, there's a lot of rushing that goes on. Having clear policies and procedures and assigned roles and responsibilities can prevent this. In addition to that, financial reporting and monitoring, it's really significant to have regular reporting requirements, review the reporting that's coming in for any anomalies, conducting self-audits of financial reporting, and identifying any significant budget variances. So reporting, defining timing and presentation of the organization's financial results that may be during board meetings, internal meetings. How are you ensuring that all the data that you're reporting is accurate? And then budgeting, this typically does come at the onset of an award, establishing a process to, formulate your plan for your grant, project revenues, expenditures of the organization, but it's also something that changes throughout a year and is something that you should be updating regularly. And then audit requirements. We're going to talk a little bit more later about audit requirements, single audits, but it's really great to have a defined process for engaging and managing the requirements. And then also who is going to handle an audit when it is ongoing? Who is going to be that key point of contact?
I think one thing that I always think of when we go over the financial management policies and procedures is a lot of what we see is organizations maybe don't on the front end delineate how they are going to account for their grants that they receive. So make sure that you have a structure in place in your accounting system to separately track your grants. That way there are no issues that may come up in an audit where you do struggle to track which grant were expenses matched to, or mixing of funds that have different requirements. So make sure that you have some policies in place for how you will account for your grants separately.
All right, and then on to subrecipient monitoring. Some organizations do not re-grant funds to subrecipients. Others, I'd say more often than not, do. So having clear policies and procedures for subrecipient monitoring is essential. And that really starts from the application process through closeout. So if you are subgranting out funds, you'll want to make sure that you have a process for receiving applications. You want to make sure you have a process for assessing those applications that are coming in to ensure that that assessment process is unbiased as possible. And then also bringing in risk factors, a risk rating system that allows you to assess what organizations may need additional support throughout the award cycle. And then budgeting and expenditure monitoring, establishing processes for monitoring budgets for subrecipients, their expenditures, and then the programmatic and financial reporting that is associated with subrecipient monitoring. So depending on the organizations that you're working with, you may be working with smaller organizations that may not have as many resources to report on time or report thoroughly, and that may be an opportunity for your organization to support them through the reporting process. And that's something that can be identified really early on in that application process. And then monitoring. So once grant activities have begun, ensuring that you have procedures for how you're going to monitor these subrecipients. How are you going to ensure that they are utilizing funds as their project plan details out? Are they expending funds responsibly? Are they on budget? Do they need budget modifications? And then in addition to that, performing desk reviews, performing on-site monitoring reviews to ensure that they are retaining proper documentation and performance data. That's a really key element. You may have an organization that is reporting on time, but sometimes if you are not out on site or if you are not in frequent communication with that partner agency, that subrecipient, you may not have a full grasp on what is going on, maybe some of the roadblocks that they're hitting, and how you can best support those organizations. And then I would say applicable requirements. This is something I would say that happens more in the onboarding process with subrecipients, but ensuring that they're aware of federal funding requirements, because those do trickle down from the prime agreement all the way down to subrecipients. And then it goes into monitoring. You're going to want to monitor your subrecipients to ensure that they are remaining compliant with those regulations. All right, and then procurement policies and procedures. This one's a bit of a wordy slide, so I'll try and do a bit of an abbreviated version. I would say procurement policies and procedures are probably the number one policy and procedure that organizations are lacking, particularly smaller organizations. So what it really means to have a procurement policy is you have a process for procuring goods. You are in alignment with the CFR, the federal guidelines, in terms of the thresholds for required documentation, the number of quotes that you should be retaining, understanding purchasing exceptions, understanding documentation that's required when receiving, vendor management. There are so many different elements of procurement that it is especially important to have those policies and procedures, and not only have those policies and procedures, but have your team trained on those as well. So that one is a little bit deeper, but isn't often, that's an often one that we find that organizations do not have or do not have a detailed or update policy on. All right, so let's say you have drafted these really pretty policies and procedures for your organization, or you've updated your P&Ps that have not been updated since, let's say, 2007. Feeling really good about those policies and procedures. And then your next step after that is to train your personnel on those policies and procedures. That can be a key gap where organizations do have strong policies and procedures, but there's a gap in between what your policies and procedures say and then what your team is actually doing day to day. So that's where training comes in to make sure that they understand that this is a requirement. This isn't only a requirement of your organization, but this is a requirement of you receiving these funds. And by not adhering to policies and procedures that that are based off of federal regulations can put your organization at risk to not receive funds in the future. So allocating funds, that one is related to ongoing monitoring. You're going to want to make sure that throughout the whole grant award cycle, once your team members are trained on policies and procedures, they continue to implement and follow those throughout the whole grant award. All right. And then executing and monitoring. You've got your policies and procedures set up. You have your team trained. You're getting into reporting on your grants. A key element in this process is tracking the required reporting, track your due dates, track your required reviews and approvals, and retain documentation that needs to be retained for those reports. Developing tracking mechanisms, not only for reporting, but for progress in your grant award. Where are you in your budget and your financial progress? Where are you in meeting your programmatic goals? If you are not meeting your goals, it's a great opportunity to talk to your funder, talk to your program officer, and have conversations about how you can adjust potentially the scope of your award or troubleshoot. Maybe try some different tactics that you haven't tried before to ensure that you are accomplishing the goals of your grant award. And then a key thing is retaining all documentation related to expenses that have been incurred. You'll want to make sure that you are tracking how your funds have been spent. You're keeping those purchase orders, the receiving documentation, vendor invoices, receipts, timesheets, pay stubs, subrecipient and subcontractor agreements. We used to see a lot of shoe boxes that had all of this information stored. I would say not a best practice. I would advise using a digital platform to store this documentation, because when you have multi-year grants, it does become quite cumbersome to pull out that shoebox and try and go through documentation, especially in the event of an audit. And it also just makes your lives easier. If you can go back and you can do self-audits and say, okay, we have all the documentation, we're prepared in the case of an audit, we have everything that we need. And then monitoring how funds are spent. So developing an ongoing compliance monitoring function that is tracking all of the requirements of your grant. Those are the requirements that can be found in the prime agreement. You'll want to make sure that you are checking all the boxes in terms of the requirements of your grant to ensure that you are in good standing with your funder and you are eligible for future funding, and to ensure that if you do need to make any adjustments, you're making those adjustments, I say at least by the halfway point in your grant.
All right. Before I get into the importance of grant monitoring, I just want to say thank you to those of you that have asked questions in the Q&A so far. Really appreciate it. We'll get to those toward the end of our presentation. We've not forgot about them or are ignoring them. Thank you, and we will definitely address them. And if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. All right, so the importance of grant monitoring. The definition of grant monitoring. So that's the ongoing process of tracking and evaluating grant activities and expenditures. So although some monitoring is required, your grant monitoring should not just be limited to what is required of you. It promotes compliance with grant requirements, yes, but also helps facilitate timely identification of issues and challenges. Ongoing monitoring can raise yellow flags before they become red flags, or before someone else notices them and you don't have an opportunity to make changes. It enhances the accountability and transparency of your organization, which is fantastic for your internal and external reputation, and supports effective resource allocation and project management. It is more efficient. Doing ongoing self-monitoring is more efficient, 100%. Even if it may seem like extra work and extra effort beyond the requirements in your grants or awards, it will save you time and resources. So these are some of the key components of effective grant monitoring. So regular reporting, making sure that you've got a schedule for progress and financial reports. Different types of reports may be required of you in order to meet the obligations of your award. So like we've talked about before, there may be financial reporting that's required, but there may also be progress. So how far along have you gotten in the performance measures that have been put in place to meet the goal of the project? Some other types of reports may be data collection, where they're asking you to gather key metrics and statistics, maybe of a population that the grant is serving, or of other milestones or key performance indicators. Another thing that will help reporting is using standardized templates for consistency. Something that we have often encountered in supporting the subrecipient monitoring for clients is a lot of organizations have different accounting systems, and not all of them will spit out a report that provides the same level of detail and information that is needed for reporting. Some of them may give way too much information, and that can be cumbersome to review for the agencies that are doing the monitoring of your project. So use a standardized template for consistency. Data collection and analysis. So we talked about it in just a moment ago in terms of a data collection report. While a report may not be required of you, that internal data collection and analysis of that is going to be key to your grant. So make sure that you're collecting that quantitative and qualitative data to measure progress, and then analyze that data to inform decision-making and make any adjustments that may be needed, maybe to pivot in order to meet your objectives, or maybe the climate has changed and needs have changed for your award. Use that data to make sure that it's influencing your decision-making. Another key component is site visits and desk reviews. If you are subgranting out funds, make sure that you are conducting monitoring either virtually or in person to make sure that you have an idea of how project is being implemented and that it is being implemented in accordance with the requirements. Perform desk reviews. So a desk review would be a review of expenditure data. Make sure that you're reviewing that to ensure that it meets the documentation requirements that you may be beholden to for your audit, and also ensure that it's complete and accurate. Have check-in meetings with your project teams and key stakeholders of the award, so your funders, to make sure that that communication is ongoing. And then risk management, identify those potential risks and then create strategies to help mitigate those risks. And then make sure that you're monitoring those risk factors throughout the grant lifecycle.
All right, I see we have quite a few questions coming in, which is super exciting. So we'll definitely have time for those at the end. So for monitoring subrecipient agreements, this is a step-by-step really on processes for monitoring those awards. The first step in that process is going to be looking at reviewing ongoing program and financial reporting. That may be across, a dozen subrecipient agreements. It could be across 2 subrecipient agreements, depending on the structure of your organization. You'll want to look at that financial reporting, and you'll want to ensure that funding is spent in compliance with the grant agreement and other requirements. And that applies to the prime grant agreement, and then also the subrecipient agreement that your organization has in place. So if you have any additional requirements, that they have spent funds in accordance with those. And then tracking and monitoring spending in general to see where they are at in their budget. Do they need a budget modification to ensure that they expend all of their funds? Additionally, if you are on if you were on an advance payment schedule, you'll want to make sure that you're recouping any advances well prior to the end of the contract. And then depending on the results of that monitoring, so if you do find that some funding has been spent out of compliance, that's an opportunity to perform a site visit or desk review. Visits and desk reviews can be really insightful to what is going on with the program. You may learn things about an organization that you aren't learning in status calls. If they're having capacity issues that may be impacting their reporting, or if there are some knowledge gaps, and there are opportunities for you to support them in those knowledge gaps. Okay, and then planning for program closeout. You are nearing the end of your grant award agreement. So you'll want to ensure that all payments have been sent out to subrecipients and subcontractors. That includes performing final financial reconciliations before you are administering those payments. Subrecipients certainly rely on payments of their funders. We want to ensure that everyone is paid out accurately and timely. Additionally, final reporting, so all final programmatic and financial reporting is submitted to the main funding agency. So that may be collecting programmatic and financial reporting from your organization itself, but also from any subrecipients that you have sub-awarded funds, ensuring that you have those final programmatic reports from them, final financial reports, and then any documentation of outcomes of monitoring. And then record retention, ensuring that you are keeping your records related to that grant. Record retention requirements do vary from grant to grant, so ensure that you're looking at your prime agreement and not making assumptions on any standards related to record retention. That does happen in quite a few instances, and you've done all this work to get everything in order, execute a grant really strongly, and just keep that documentation for as long as required.
Awesome. And looks like we have our third polling question of today. Has your organization been subject to a single audit recently? A, yes, every year. B, recently, but not every year. C, no, not yet. D, I'm not sure. I'll give everyone a few moments to respond here. And for those of you that would like a copy of today's slide deck, you can download them from the folder that says slide deck and handouts. We will also be sending the slides via email after the webcast. Awesome, and let's take a look at the results.
Awesome. Okay. So for those of you that are not sure, you would absolutely know if you had been subject to a single audit. So probably not yet, which means that there's time to get ready for it, and we'll cover what that may look like for you in just a moment. All right. So what is a single audit? A single audit is required for non-federal or tribal entities that expend $1 million or more in federal funds in a fiscal year. They're designed to evaluate your financial statements and compliance with specific federal regulations of the awards that have been tested. So I saw a question in the chat earlier about when the threshold change takes place. So the threshold for a single audit previously was $750,000 of expenditures in a fiscal year that would trigger a single audit. And for all audits beginning on or after October 1st, so now, that is the $1 million threshold now. So if you have not yet had your single audit, then your single audit would be at that $1 million threshold as of October 1st of this year. So who's subject to a single audit? Any nonprofit, state, local, tribal government, educational institute, or truly any entity that receives federal grant funds and meets the expenditure threshold in their fiscal year. Why are single audits important? Ensure proper use of federal funds. Hold the federal government accountable, as well as all of the entities that receive federal funding. Ensure that there's transparency there, and then identify areas for improvement in financial management and compliance. What will your single audit look like? They're all going to be different depending on the type of funding that you receive and the awards that are selected during the audit. But some key things that will always be there are there will be a determination of the fair presentation of financial statements. There will be a determination of the completeness and accuracy of the schedule of federal awards, so your CFA. Your auditors will gain an understanding and test internal controls to ensure that they are helping you maintain compliance and effective and appropriate administration of the grant. Determine if federal regulations and terms and conditions of the awards were followed. Follow up on any prior year audit findings, if there were. And then obtain evidence to form and support opinions on the financial statements and program compliance. And then they'll develop and report internal control and compliance findings for the single audit report. how to prepare. Make sure that you're gathering and summarizing all of your federal grant information. Prepare your financial statements and the accompanying notes to the financial statements. Prepare your CFA. Something that I like to advise organizations to do is not just prepare your CFA at the end of the year or right before audit. Keep your CFA up to date at specific intervals throughout the year to make sure that you're tracking that along the way. Not only will it save you time ahead of your audit, but it'll also give you an idea of what programs may be subject to single audit or if you will have a single audit in the year. Ensure your policies are up to date and in place and comply with federal requirements. Make sure that your auditors have adequate access to information. The easier you make their jobs, the easier your single audit will be. Make sure you review your prior single audit findings if you had any and are able to speak to them once your auditors ask. Prepare your schedule of prior audit findings, which is a required part of a single audit if you had prior audit findings. And then review and update your internal controls as needed. So next we have all of the compliance requirements. Every federal award will have some, but not all of these compliance requirements. They differ depending on the type of award. So it's important that you refer to the uniform guidance to understand which compliance requirements are applicable to your award. And the compliance supplement uniform guidance will elaborate for auditors specifically which compliance requirements need to be tested for each award. Some common findings that we've seen in single audits is reporting being late. Maybe your funder or your the pass-through entity that you're reporting to doesn't ding you or care if your reports are late, but regardless, that can come up as a single audit finding. Procurement not having those policies in place and not purchasing as specified. Allowable costs, sometimes they slip through the cracks, but making sure that you're tracking them as clearly as possible throughout the award so that you can take action before your auditor maybe finds the unallowable costs. And then subrecipient monitoring, make sure that you're doing it. We've seen findings where subrecipient monitoring has been done inconsistently and does not meet the requirements of the awards. There are many, many other potential findings that come up in a single audit, but those are just a few that we wanted to highlight for you all. Yeah, I think we have our next polling question.
Okay, our final polling question is, how confident are you in your organization's grant management and compliance functions? A, very confident, we are pros. B, confident, but with room for improvement. C, not very confident, but we know where to improve. D, not confident at all. Please help. I will give everyone a few moments here to respond. And just as a reminder, once you have completed all CPE requirements, you'll be able to download a PDF of your CPE certificate from the CPE progress window. Give everyone another few seconds here. Awesome, and let's take a look at the results.
Awesome. Love to see those results. Always room for improvement, and we're here to help with that. And I see that we do have quite a few questions in the Q&A. I will do my best to answer those, although I don't think we'll be able to get through all of them. There are a few that are similar that I'll try and group together. Oh, we will not have. Okay. All right. So most of the questions that we've received have been around risk assessments. Risk assessments are very important in determining how you are going to set up your compliance plan. There are different elements of risk assessments, first being the pre-award risk assessments that are required, but then also pre-award risk assessments that are taking into consideration whether or not the funding source is federal, is it state, is it private funding, what is the experience of the team members working on the grant? And that is more of a holistic risk assessment. So lots of questions around that. And then I also saw quite a few around procurement and then around allocation and staffing. We do have your details and we can follow up with you all via email on those specific questions that you have. But unfortunately, we've had a little bit longer than anticipated webinar thanks to all of the interaction throughout. We hope that this was helpful, and we will be in touch soon with some answers and some guidance to those questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan and Michael, for a great presentation today. If we didn't have time to answer your questions, we will do our best to follow up with you after the webcast. As a reminder, if you attended today's presentation in a group and would like to receive CPE credit, you must complete the group attendance sheet found in the slide deck and handouts window. If you participated as an individual and met all certification requirements, your certificate is available to download now in the CPE progress window. I'll keep the webcast console open for a few minutes to give you time to download your CPE certificate. A copy of your CPE certificate will be emailed within 3 weeks, should you have any difficulty downloading it now. Here's a link to an online survey where you can provide feedback for today's presentation. Please take a moment to complete this survey as your feedback is very important to us. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you'll join us again next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate it. We appreciate the feedback and all the engagement. We will look forward to talking with you soon and answering any follow-up questions you may have. All right, we'll be logging off, but thanks again and happy holidays to all.